I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Law. Each week it's my privilege to bring guests that teach all of us about the law, how it works, how it doesn't always work, how it should work, and what we can do to make it work better, and how the law touches all of our lives and each of our lives in many, many ways. This is a treat. I finally persuaded retired Judge Bill Carver to come on as a guest. I've tried this many times, but caught him in a day of weakness. He was driving through during COVID, and he wasn't seeing many people. And he popped in, and we had a little bit of social time because he was coming or going from Apple Acres, a neighbor of mine that sell apples, and they didn't have any apples that day. So Bill and I had some apples, and Judge Carver, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, George.
You were here, I believe, as a criminal defense lawyer, then in the DA's office, then DA, then judge. For how many years were you judge here in Winnebago County?
36 years as a judge, and before that, 7 years as a prosecutor, twice elected as district attorney, and prior to that, I did start a private law practice with a cohort of mine, Joe Herond, and that's how we got our foot in the door here in Winnebago County and Oshkosh. We were both from Oshkosh. When we graduated from Wisconsin, we came back here to practice law. So it all started downtown on Main Street and at Wagoo in Maine, in a building that Joe Herond put together that used to be the Bungalow Restaurant. If there's any person out there that can remember that far back, it's way back in 1965, I think it was, and that's when we started. And from there it progressed to an assistant district attorney, and then finally to a district attorney, and from there to a county judge for a few years, and then a circuit judge, but all in all, 36 years as a judge.
And we'll get into this in just a minute. Judges in the state of Wisconsin do lots of things. And I was reminded last night when I talked to my wife, Suzette, that almost 24 years ago, you came out to our house and you pronounced us man and wife. We're still together. I hold you responsible, but not nearly as much as she does. I mean, she got a life sentence out of this. But that's just one of the many things as a judge that you do and did as a volunteer.
Well, that was one of our responsibilities in a way. Many people came into the courthouse to be married also. I kept track. I'm not that nerdy, but I did keep track of how many weddings that I performed. And when I retired, I went through them and counted them up. 750 weddings that I performed during my years as a judge.
Well, we've had a lot in the papers lately, and people don't, I think, fully understand how you become a judge and what are the routes to becoming a judge.
Well, in Wisconsin, becoming a judge is an elective process. It's nonpartisan election. It's in those spring elections when you have city councils and county boards elected. That's when the judgeships go on the record. And you're nonpartisan, running independently, and for circuit judges, which I was, you're elected every 6 years. And after 6 years, of course, if you want to continue, you've got to go back and run again. And you can run indefinitely, but I had 6 terms, I think, and I felt that that was sufficient. And when I got to be 72 years old, I found it was time to retire.
Well, before you ran for and became elected judge and re-elected judge, you were DA. Now, you had to be elected for that too, didn't you?
Yes. The district attorneys are elected on a partisan election in November's. So I was elected twice as a district attorney. As a partisan, I ran as a Republican back in 1968 or 1970. generally speaking, Republicans won in Winnebago County. It was a county election, I should point out. It's not a city election. It's a county election for district attorney. It's a county election for circuit judge.
But then, I want the public to understand this. If for some reason there's a vacancy during the term of a district attorney or a judge, how does that get filled for the remainder of the term?
The governor selects someone to fill out the term. And I guess that's happened a couple of times in Winnebago County in recent times. But when a judge leaves office in the middle of a term, it's filled by the governor.
But the term is a precise, scheduled period of time, and so the next time that term is up, it's contested again, and there can be any number of people who are qualified or think they're qualified to throw their hat in the ring. And
that's true.
What are the qualifications to be a judge?
An attorney. And age, I'm not sure now, but maybe there isn't any age limitation. You just need to be an attorney.
Now, if I recall correctly, your first race was against Judge Sitter.
That's correct.
And you were running from the DA's office.
Yes.
All right. And if I recall correctly, that was a pretty hotly contested contest.
Well, it was unusual, that's for sure. I was sort of drawn into it, put it that way. There was also a retirement at the same time. Judge Herb Miller was retiring, and it's kind of personal, but for example, Tom Williams was interested in running for the vacancy. And when I spoke to him, or when he came in to speak to me, he said, "Geez, are you interested in running for judge?" I said, "Well, not really." I said, "If I was, I'd run for the vacancy." And I'll never forget Tom Williams said, "Well, I'm running for the vacancy." And I said, "Well, very good." I said, "I'll certainly support you." And then I was kind of drawn into the other branch, which was Judge Sitter's branch, because it was the criminal court. And I was a district attorney. I felt that I was somehow connected to the law enforcement and to the going from a district attorney position to a county judge position, which was focused on the criminal law. And that's how I was somehow focused into running for that branch.
Hold that thought. It's time for our first break, and I want to get back to how you fit in and how the support seemed to change from the law enforcement people when you changed from district attorney to judge. You put on a different hat. We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Law. I'm George Curtis. My guest is retired Judge Bill Carver. He's retired from being a successful district attorney, which is the best opportunity I know to make enemies, and then became elected as judge, which is the second best opportunity I know to make enemies. I think our audience would like to know the difference between the skill sets and how you can successfully be a district attorney and get elected judge and serve for a number of years as judge and retire in the same community in pretty good safety.
Well, we can talk a little bit about that. I might point out personally, being an assistant DA and then being the DA was the most interesting job that I'd ever had. A district attorney knows everything that's in a way that's going on in the community. Police officers are in to talk to them. Attorneys come in to talk to them. All kinds of social workers and guardianship people come in to talk to you. So you kind of know a lot about what's going on in the community. I enjoyed the job as district attorney. And it was the most, in a lot of ways, most fun job. And I'll never forget, for example, after I was elected judge, the day that I left the district attorney's office and walked down the hall and went behind the bench into my chambers and sat down, all of a sudden it seemed like it was very quiet. Nobody came to talk to me. And it was like I lost all my friends. My friends as attorneys were reluctant to come in and talk to me because it might not look good. And so it took me quite a while to come over that, get out of that feeling. And so taking what I learned and what I did and who I worked with as a district attorney to a judgeship took some thought process and how it's going to work. And but fortunately, when I started out, I went from being a prosecutor in criminal cases to a judgeship that was handling most of the criminal cases in Winnebago County. So I was very familiar with the cases. I was familiar with some of the people and as witnesses or whatever. So that wasn't hard to do, but you had to recognize that you're not on, quote, one side. You're not prosecuting as a judge. You're there to term, and what I always said, fairness, and using some common sense along with it in how to handle case after case after case, and trying to be uniform in how you're handling certain cases. That became very important. And so I had a good way to start. I had the background to start, and I just had to apply the evenness of my job, dealing with a prosecutor and a defendant at the same time, and how to be fair to both. And that was what was hard.
I would think that would be extremely difficult. In the DA's office, the police officer and the assistant DAs are in your office all the time, and the police officers get to know you as a person and expect you to support their position. Now all of a sudden you have a new role, and the defense people, and I was one of those, not so much. You're no longer buddy with the cops. You've got to kind of split the baby down the middle and be very careful, even in the halls, to these people who are your friends and want to stop and talk to you about your personal life, your golf, your hunting, your fishing, and that sort of thing. Your social life. I'll bet a lot of your friends were attorneys or cops.
That's true. Of course, at that time, a lot of my friends were attorneys. And but you know, maybe I was fortunate. They weren't, what would you say, pushy attorneys. They didn't try to take advantage of the fact that they knew me or that they were expecting me to do something in their favor. They were friends, but they were good friends, fair friends. And since we talked and knowing that I was coming here today, the last few days, I was thinking one time, thinking back in 36 years, I don't think I ever had an attorney come in and try to convince me to do something inappropriate. You know, you always think that, well, judges are, quote, on the take. You know, they're doing things for their friends, whether they're in business or I never had to face that problem. I never had to report somebody that was inappropriately approaching me as a judge.
And I frankly practiced law other places before coming here, and I've been here lots of years. I never heard a single rumor that a judge was on the take. And I think that's wonderful that we can say that and believe it. And I do believe it, and obviously you believe it. But you had some other adjustments to make now that you're on the bench, and you've got to look at evidence differently and testimony differently than as a prosecutor. How big an adjustment was that change of clothing?
You know, I don't think it became personally a problem. Somehow, even in my own personal life, I suppose, I always thought to be fair. I didn't, because a person was, quote, a defendant, I didn't look down on them. I didn't think there was, quote, something wrong with them. They may have committed a crime, but that's the job of the prosecutor, to convince myself or a jury that the person should be found guilty. My job was to be fair, to give them the opportunity to defend themselves or to be defended by an attorney, and let's hear it out. Let's hear all the evidence. And then I've always thought my job is just to be fair and reasonable, common sense. And, you know, along that line, I knew some judges that couldn't handle that. And some of them, I knew a couple of them that served one term and decided not to continue to be a judge. And I kind of inquired why. They just didn't like it. They couldn't make decisions. Some people that become judges, quote, can't make decisions. Now, I've always thought, and maybe the thought was, you've got a controversy here, you've got two different sides, and the important thing was to make a decision even if it's wrong. I learned that playing sports when talking to referees.
Okay.
Come on, things are going wrong here. Make a decision even if it's wrong, because then we can move forward.
And that's a good transition. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to be back about how things changed during the many years you were on the bench, the constant evolution. We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Law. I'm George Curtis, and retired Judge Carver is my guest, and he's had quite a career in the law. And as a judge, he's handled many jury trials. I will admit that I have a great bias. I believe in the sanctity, the wisdom of having 12 strangers put in a room to decide on what is the truth. I think it's impossible to corrupt 12 strangers. I think the juries do a great, honest job, and I think it's one of the most important planks in our national structure to keep and preserve the jury system. Shoot me down.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, it's the final test of a case. Attorneys nowadays, it's true that many cases come in, 90% probably are settled. The attorneys settle them. They get together, they do discovery, as we talked about, and they find out what each side has to offer and what each side can prove. And once you find out what your adversary can prove, you have to rethink what your case is all about and what you can prove. So as a result, most cases, criminal and civil cases, are settled, which is good for the system, because they're, as judgeships and as courthouses, you're overwhelmed with cases. Somehow they got to get settled. In the end, you go to have a jury trial. I enjoyed jury trials. Thinking about coming here today, I was thinking back about jury trials that I've had, and how many times I've been surprised as a judge about the result of a jury trial. Because a judge sits there and the judge is thinking in his own mind how he would find, say in a criminal case, guilt or innocence. And you sit there and you think, well, if I was on the jury, this is how I would decide it. You say that to yourself. You don't try to influence the jury in any way or manner. And the jury comes back and they come up with a result that you didn't think they were going to come up with. And you'd sit back and you'd think about it, and suddenly you'd remember and think, now I know how they came up with that, and I missed that myself. So when you get 12 people together, it's very interesting what they do and how they resolve cases. And I've always felt they've every jury trial I've had, they've done the right thing. And they've done the only thing they could come up with. But sometimes it takes them a long time. Sometimes I think, boy, this process of deliberation might take hours. Maybe they'll have to come back tomorrow. And next thing you know, in 30 minutes, they're back in court and they got a decision. And they're usually right on the money.
I concur with that, and I would like to give you an opportunity to talk about the importance of not ducking jury duty, because it always is at a very inconvenient time in your personal life.
Well, I've talked to jurors, and many times you bring in a whole group of maybe 40-some jurors, and you're about ready to select jurors, and as you go through the process, somebody will come up with an excuse or something that they couldn't serve. But I would put it back on them, and I'd say, you know, is this really true, and can you really serve? And or I've had people before they're called send a letter that they want to be excused, and I might have even talked to them, and I say, well, why is this? You know, you really should do it. One of the things I impress upon them is that they'll find out it's a lot different than they see on TV, and it will be an experience maybe once in their lifetime to serve on a jury, and they'll never forget the time they were on a jury. I run into people all the time that tell me, oh, I was on a jury, and I usually can't remember the case, but they remember it, and they could describe it today, even though it might have happened years ago. And so I impress upon them that they will take a lot out of it. And of course, it's a civil responsibility. You're not paid very much. You do have to take off some time. Maybe you're going to lose payment at work, but you'll never forget your opportunity to serve on a jury. And almost always I've been able to convince people to come in and give it a shot, so to speak, and they thank me for it.
In all of your experience as a trial judge in jury cases, have you ever seen what you thought was a corrupt jury? No.
That's a question. I answered it real quickly here, and I have to rethink, but I'm sure I'm correct. I never felt that a jury was any way or manner fraudulently come up with a decision, or that any juror individually was somehow taken aside and unbeknownst to the court and convinced to come up with a particular verdict, civil or criminal.
Well, insurance companies are trying to persuade the public that we just have lots and lots of unnecessary, expensive jury trials that don't have to take place, and they take place because of greedy lawyers like George Curtis that are trying to get money for people who don't deserve it and that sort of thing. Yet I'm tossing out the statistics show that we have fewer jury trials every year, in part because of the influence of big money on legislation, in part because of mediation, which has somewhat changed the ball game. And so in greater part, because industry, business, government has worked into the law through politicians and through legislatures, arbitrations and mediations, and so you don't have a right to a jury trial. If your cell phone quits, read your guarantee. You don't get a jury trial. You get a mediation. If your refrigerator quits, you don't get a jury trial. You get a mediation. And that's true with more and more consumer products. And then you call and say, fine, I want my mediation. And they say, well, gee, that's easy, George. We got the mediators right here. They're Sally, Wendy, and Joe. So people don't understand that their rights are being eaten away without them knowing it.
Well, businesses more and more are putting into their contracts mandatory arbitration. And people agree to it when they enter into the business agreement with some company. And some of these companies, of course, we know are so huge that there's just no way that really they could have a jury trial on some of those issues. And so they have to get experts on each side to do mediation. Mediation is very important locally here. But these big companies, they have to arbitrate it and get it settled one way or another. But that's written into the contracts that many businesses have, and it takes it out of your business, of course. But you mentioned mediation, and almost all the cases here go to mediation, including your family court cases. They have to be mediated, and hopefully the parties come to. I did some mediation after I retired, and I found that was harder to do than going to trial.
Well, I think that's the subject of another program.
Absolutely.
We're out of time on this one. It has been such a delight, and you look so healthy. You look like you maybe could have worked another 24 years. Thank you very much, Judge Carver, for being on the show.
Well, I'm glad to be here, George.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was a treat. Judge Carver has given service to this county as a public officer with integrity, honesty, effort, sincerity, and he has earned his retirement. But he hasn't retired as a citizen, and he really hasn't tried to retire as a citizen. His appearance here today is evidence of that. He has taught us the importance of participation, not avoiding any citizen's duties, stepping up to the plate, being a juror, being a voter. And this message is especially directed at our producer, Ron Bullock. He has just been notified that he is going to be called as a juror. Ron, show up, no excuses, and do your civic duty. Democracy needs you. I'm George Curtis, and that's my opinion.